So guys, let me start with this introduction of Tino. And let's start Tino because otherwise the hour goes away. I am Paolo Landrini and now I am working for GM International all my life. And later I will give you a few moments discussion on who we are. But let me introduce Tino Van de Capelle for those of you who are joining us for the first time. Tino has been in functional safety uh, all of his life, almost. uh, is senior functional safety expert and trainer under the PUB Rhineland SIS program, and written many, how to say, not books, sorry, funny, not my best day. So he has been around for quite some time discussing functional safety, he's given a lot of webinars and seminars. So he's very qualified to do this job on functional safety management. So let's move on to next slide. DMI, so I said DMI is focusing the webinar, so I have to give you a few words about GM International. We are a safety company. We design, engineer, manufacture intrinsically safe and certified devices for most automation packages from DCS to oil and gas, SCADA, marine, and so on. Which are used in all the industries, typically oil and gas, petrochemical, pharmaceutical, but also mining, food and beverage, and so on. We have over 40 years of experience in this market. Very proud to manufacture our product here in our headquarters near Milan, Italy. On the other hand, we are global players with presence in all the continents. We have over 9 subsidiaries. We have 9 subsidiaries. The next slide, Dino, please. We have 9 subsidiaries and over 75 distributors. We run many courses in fire safety, EX, and cybersecurity, and we have thousands of installations around the globe. There you move into talk.
My fault. Sorry.
No issue. So, because we make safety product, our product maintain the plant safe and available. We try to do the production as best as possible using state-of-the-art technology. We trace our product from the incoming components, the outgoing finished goods. We know where they're going. We know how they're made. We know who supplied the components. So if there is an issue, we can always refer back. We do 100% testing in our automated manufacturing process. We offer 5 years warranty, 10 years of availability. We do this because we believe in safety. And this is one of the reasons why we promote these webinars. Next, and to stand behind us, our certification, we have over 15 independent agencies around the globe certifying our product. We also have PUB Fire Safety Management for SIG3, up to SIG3. We are ISO 9000 Quality Management Certification, ISO 45,000 certification, ISO 14,000 Environmental Management System Certification, process risk compliance, and a lot more. Next, these are the products we manufacture, IS barriers, which are certified up to SIG3. We have safety relay with or without line monitoring. They are also certified SIG2 and SIG3. We have a line of isolators for non-EX application. They are still certified. And a line of power supply, which are SIG3 certified. They're also EX certified. Some of them can be installed in classified area. And a line of multiplexer, digital temperature, arc multiplexer, a lot of termination panels which we use to interface all the system out there, a line of SPDs and some loop indicators, and as we discussed earlier, a division that runs cybersecurity, fire safety, and EX services, courses, and services. Let's see next. These are our customers, so system vendor from ABB to Yokogawa, all of them in between. We interface many EPC contractor. We're very proud to supply our product to several OEMs, which install our barriers for safety relay onto their machines, joinery, compressors, well-out packages, and so on. And we are in the area of many, many oil and gas end users around the globe. I believe that is it. Let's see next slide, Paul. Okay, Tino. So before we start fire safety management webinar, let me remind you there is only one way for you guys to talk to us, which is through the question and answer box. You can click on it and we can try to answer them, along the webinar or at the end of the webinar, depending on Tino. And we also prepare a presentation at the end of the webinar on the question and answer you have sent in through the registration process. Okay, Tino, sorry for my little, I don't know, not my
Okay,
best day.
perfect. Thank you, Paolo. Thank you for GMI again to give us an opportunity to share some of the know-how of functional safety standards. Today's topic, as Paolo was just mentioning, is the management of the functional safety, which is actually nothing more than a quality scheme. As you maybe have noticed on the slide that Paolo was showing you all the certificates, that is most likely for the company of GMI one of the biggest investments over all the years to be qualified to a certain reference document, which is in this case also the function safety standard. But the function safety management doesn't stop with the vendors. It is also for the end users, operating companies, for the system integrators, and for any engineer who is actually accountable and or responsible to carry out some activities in that life cycle. So if I take here let me just move this one screen a little bit to the sides. Okay, so if you look here to this slide, you see here the picture or the schematic of the life cycle, which is actually a kind of a working method step-by-step plan from the top, number 1, to the bottom, number 8. And all those phase activities, they all mean something. And as Paul already mentioned, we do have several other webinars that actually specific. We're talking about some of those items, such as an example, the safety requirement specification. We also have one about the design and engineering of your SIS or of your safety loops. But today's one is more a generic one, because as you can see here in this block or phase number 10, we call this phase 10, and I have a reference here, they say clause 5. That means if someone is familiar with the IEC 61511, the normative section number 1, then if you go to chapter 5, that is the clause 5 reference of the functional safety management description. In that description will be a whole topic also about the monitoring of your quality of your work. And this is measured in the industry with something called assessments. Yet again, we have a separate webinar handling those assessments. This webinar, including all the previous ones, are always recorded via YouTube. So you can actually access them through a YouTube link. Also, the slides of this webinar here today will be sent to you in a PDF. And this is typically what will be done by the people of GMI. So the function safety management itself, the reason why we have function safety management, to explain this very simple, it is to increase the quality of your activities. In the whole, if you can increase the quality, you will start to decrease making human failures. That's basically, in a nutshell, what function safety management is trying to achieve. And I'm happy to say that since 2016/2017, if someone would be here in the list, I'm just looking at all the list of all the numbers of people attending this webinar. If there would be someone already awake in US, which I doubt, I think most of the names are probably from other time zones, but in the US, they actually applied the 61511 like we have here in Europe in 2016/17. They actually applied it since 2018. It's all the same reference document, but the new edition 2 was actually focusing on 2 main topics. One main topic is functional safety management. That is also the reason why we have today this webinar. The other main topic is the uncertainties, the data uncertainties of your failure data. And yet again, we have also some webinars about talking about proof testing, coverage, etc., etc. Now, today's topic is about the quality. So here we talk about the management, and this is to address something that we call in our IEC, let's say, definitions, we call that systematic failures. I give a simple example. You have written a procedure for a group of engineers, and the procedure is maybe either too difficult or too ambitious or maybe not clear enough or maybe has a mistake. Whatever is the reason, that group of engineers will try to carry out that activity as per the procedure, but they may all start to make kind of the same systematic mistakes. Well, that is something that we are kind of afraid of in our IEC culture or our film safety culture, that we try to minimize that those people will start to make some systematic failures. Unfortunately, when I step back in time and I go back to edition 1 of the 61511, which was out in 2004, the main focus of many engineers, many projects is only to try to calculate and predict the availability of their safety loops. With that, they will try to use either some failure data, some PFDs as they call that, and with this probability fail on demand or danger failure on demand, they will try to predict what type of safety integrity level. Now, a systematic failure that a human will actually carry out in the future cannot be predicted. That's why we can never control human failures. The only way that we can try to do our best to avoid it, but we can never control it. Applying a function safety management is increasing the quality, as already mentioned, and function safety cannot be implemented without the involvement of a human. And as you know, the moment you involve a human, well, that's already a potential room for failure or potential, let's say, period that someone can do something wrong. And that is what we try to here highlight with our function safety management. So, as I already mentioned in the introduction, to explain it simple, it is to reduce the human failures through any activity. If it is now a HAZOP or a LOPA, or it is writing a document called safety requirement specification, or it is physically the design of hardware and or application programming, or it is the maintenance to do calibration of a transmitter, or it is the operation to open or close a valve. All these activities are always with humans. And the moment you have human activity somewhere involved, potentially they can start to make some mistakes. The policies and the strategy for achieving functional safety shall be identified, and often you see that in bigger organizations, they will overlap this together with their existing QMS or quality management system. As Paolo was just mentioning, they have also the ISO 9001 in GMI. However, I can tell you that a quality management system is great to have, but the question is, how can you prove how adequate you follow your quality management procedure? The same question will raise if you start to create a function safety management. And I had earlier this morning a telephone call with a client in Europe, and we were discussing the effectiveness of their functional safety management, and we came to the conclusion that some consultant had delivered a template, which is functional safety management templates, as you know, that are available on the market. And I told him, it's not so much the template, it's not so much the formality. The question is, how do you use that and how do you benefit from that? Of course, the first excuse will be, oh, it's all extra paperwork, Tino. Well, we know it's certainly some extra activities that you will have to prove, but the main target is still, the essence of the whole function safety management is to help the people with a certain tool that they will start to reduce human failures. The 61511, which is the newest edition too, from 2016/2017, lets you choose. They literally state in the Function Safety Management Chapter 5 in the normative part 1 of the 61511, they literally state the Function Safety Management shall either meet the requirements of the IEC 61508, which is part 1, the normative section, which was edition 2 in 2010. Edition 3 is not out yet. It's coming in a couple of years. I do expect that we should have a edition 3 from the 61508. That is for the manufacturers. So when Paulo mentioned earlier that actually GMI has function safety management according to the systematic capability equal to 3, that means they can have devices suitable up to SIL 3. That means that they have proven in their development quality, let's say, procedures that they have proven from both hardware and software development in GMI that they do comply to Chapter 6 of the IEC 61511. My advice is typically, if you're not a manufacturer, don't try to prove that you comply to Chapter 6 of the 61508 because it's probably too much, let's say, restrictive for the normal use of operation and maintenance for end users or system integrators or engineering houses. Therefore, there's an or function here in this chapter 5, and they say, or you can choose to meet or to choose the function safety management, the requirements of the standard which was derived from the SIG 1508 in this case would make sense if you are in the process industry active, that you would try to comply to chapter 5 of the normative part 1 of the SIG 1511 and not chapter 6 of the SIG 1508. That is my recommendation here at the bottom. What is now the objective? If some people would read the objectives of the IEC SIG 1511 Chapter 5 Function Safety Management, the first bullet, and that's quite important that you start to understand this bullet. And I took it from the standard definition. We need to define those activities that people have to carry out. What do they have to carry out? What do they have to achieve? We have to document those activities. That means you will have a reference document. What do you try to achieve? You need to know, of course, what is your objective, what you try to achieve with that reference document. However, you also need to prove after carrying out that activity that you actually have meet the requirements which will be given here in that document. And one of the other documents will be leading or will be coming out of your monitoring principles, which is kind of called your verification. That verification leading into a report will be needed later on by someone independent to make an assessment, independent from the people who have done the same work or in the same activities. So the SIG 1511 again have made a huge difference on functional safety assessments, stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And they have two groups of independencies. Again, I would refer to the other webinar which we have dedicated on functional safety assessment. That is why here the assess requirements are very important to comply to functional safety management. Like typically an end user fit and forgets, let's say the engineering contractor is delivering a brilliant working system, they have proved it according to the reference document, they have all the test reports delivered, they sign off and they leave the factory. Well, fit and forget and wait until your unit is not working anymore, that's not what we want as a good safety culture. That means we want to do periodic assessments, even though maybe your process plant is in function for maybe or is in operation for maybe 30, 40, 50, 60 years. So we want to do all these efforts to implement anything technical and anything non-technical, which we also call the management requirements from the IEC 611 on the lifecycle activities when you try to build a safety instrumented system. And the second objective of function safety management is we need to specify on paper the responsibilities or the activities on a personal level, on a department level, or on an organization level, which are necessary to prove, because you need to prove those independencies on personal level, department levels, or maybe subcontractor level that you may hire, which will be necessary to ensure that the functional safety objectives will be met by those who are responsible for it. One of the items will be also we need to check that the people are competent to work in those activities which for those they are accountable. And the last bullet is here, function safety assessments and audits are nothing more than a kind of a tool to monitor the quality by hopefully detecting and eliminating errors and failures before they will affect your correct functioning of your safety system. Right.
So we have a poll here, guys. I launched it. Launched it. It's one answer only, guys. IC 51511 factor 6 is required. When? During the analysis phases of the IC, during the design phase, during the operation and maintenance phase, during all of the phases except the commissioning phase, always for all phases. Okay, we'll give it a few moments to see if you.
Someone who have been listening carefully, I just explained it, so that should be.
Just explained it, and it's a fairly easy answer. But we're not judging you, anybody. In fact, we don't see the names of the people that are, clicking. We only see how many people have clicked and what are the answers. But so don't feel afraid. Just click away. Give it a few more moments, and then we will terminate and show you the result. I see that most of you are answering correctly. I would say 85%. Yes, 85%. Yeah. So give it a moment and then we will tell it all.
Okay.
Very, very interesting, how you explain the objective of functional safety management. But they're quite vast, though. It is a very, I guess it's like, I don't know how to say, it's the base for the entire functional safety, If you don't have a functional safety management in place, which kind of controls and guides all your activity, then, how can you control it? Oh, okay, so let me end it,
Okay.
share. Okay,
Yeah.
so, yeah, 80 plus
Well,
percent answer
it's
the right
correct.
answer, right? Was E
Yeah.
the right answer,
Yes, the last one, E, always for all the phases is the correct answer. The reason why I think we had such a high score is I recognize some names from people that actually have been trained in the training classes over all these years. So, however, those who thought it's only applicable during the analysis phases, that would not really make sense. If it would be only during the analysis phases, that would mean that only the engineering contractor, all the way from the process risk analysis, the LOPA, and maybe also including the safety requirement specification, that they would handle their quality of functionality management. Yes, it makes sense, but it needs to be carried over to whoever will actually start to design and build the system. So it's also for those who physically will design as a system integrator, as an example, or a system manufacturer, the projects. But again, they have to carry this over again. And this will also make sense for the end users who needs to operate and maintain, and especially to maintain a safety system to prove it is still working as per requirement specification. That will take some efforts. That means it's also for them. So in a nutshell, it is for everyone. Everyone, whoever is in the life cycle, it is for every individual activity applicable functional safety management.
including
Stop,
the
sorry.
commissioning,
Sorry? Including the
including the commission.
installation, commissioning, the validation, everything needs to be managed by the functional safety manager. Okay, so
Next,
let's continue. So, who shall follow, as I exactly previously just explained? Simple answer is everyone. It doesn't matter if the engineer is only involved in maybe doing some, coding in a safety PLC, or it is maybe an engineer that you hire to do some wiring in your mastering cabinets. You could say, well, it's only mastering, it's only a wire. Yes, indeed. But that person also needs to be competent for the activities for which he needs to carry out for you. So it's not only for the complex activities, it's also for the simple activities, which are sometimes, often forgotten. Or maybe you hired some contractors to do some look testing or maybe some calibration, like on a tank farm or something. I was thinking, well, it is for simply for everyone. If there's now a design engineer or a company, or it is a system integrator building some cabinets, or it is a system manufacturer building some projects, or it is the end user itself having an operating company with a division called process people and also some maintenance people. So it is basically for everyone. And the reason for that is, and that's the second bullet, which when this was launched by Edition 2 in 2016-17 by the 65011, the end users were not really amused by some like myself and other of my colleagues in the food safety industry to say that, listen, Mr. End User, it is not only for your system integrator or engineering contractor that you hire to give you a turnkey job here. You have to take this over. You are delivering service in the activities, which is called operation, maintenance. Maybe you're involved in the modification. Maybe you're also involved in the decommissioning. So the reason for that is, in the standard they say, if a supplier makes any functional safety claim for a product or a service, so product suppliers, they will be covered under the functional safety management from the 659. But the system integrators, system manufacturers, or the operating companies and users, they are delivering a service in the life cycle, which are used to demonstrate compliance with the 65011. Well, then that supplier shall have a functional safety management system in place. That's the first definition. You shall have one. But what is more important, you shall prove, you shall have a system procedure in place to demonstrate how adequate you're actually using that functional safety management between brackets quality scheme. So it doesn't make sense to create a monster of a functional safety management procedure that no one is using because there's much too much paperwork and the engineers are all the same. We all like to do things without filling in papers. Well, here, part of our job will also be to prove the quality, will also be paperwork. So, film safety management system needs to be demonstrate how adequate you are using it. I'll give you a simple example. I've done some assessment or I've done some inspection on a project many years ago. And the manufacturer, when I walked in the office, they were very proud to show me all their certificates behind the reception desk. And one of them was Food Safety Management 65011. So I actually was there for the client. He sent me to check that project. And I was asking to the system manufacturer in that location, I said, can you show me evidence on how you have used that food safety management on the project for my client that I'm coming to inspect? And of course, they showed me first their overall procedure, which was from their headquarters somewhere around the world, but was not specific meant to be used by them because their organization was a lot different in size than the bigger organization as the headquarters. So I asked them, I said, listen, regardless of your procedure, show me evidence how you have used it on this specific project that I'm coming to inspect. And if you would ask the same question to your own projects, how can you prove how adequate you have used your functional safety management, if you have one? That is the first question. Do you have one, and can you prove you are following it? What are the basics? And without going too much in detail, but I still give you here some hints and tips. The first item in the chapter 5 of functional safety management will be we have to describe what are the liabilities and the organization organigram. That means that will most likely coming out of the quality management system. We also have to describe the resources. That means the persons, department, organization, responsibilities. But more important, we also like to find some evidence of competencies. And competencies are always three items for us to find out. One is experience, second is know-how, and the third one is formal training. And many engineers, they're working with certain tools, software packages, or even instruments, and they were never really formally trained in it. And if they receive a training from one of the vendors, often they get only a piece of paper called certificate of attendance. That means your body was maybe there, but maybe your brain was distracted and didn't really learn something. So our main question is, what did you learn and how can you prove your know-how of this giving formal training? That is to highlight a little bit about the competencies that we try to find out. The second bullet is, by food safety management requirement, we shall carry out a process hazard and risk assessment. I'll give you an example. For those who may remember, the worst chemical incident called Bhopal in India was from Union Carbide. They had these facilities already in US. They did a cut, copy, paste. They actually put it down in Bhopal in India, but they have not done a new risk assessment to actually find out that all the poor people in India living around the slums, around the fences of the plant, well, that was a new risk assessment that was missed because they have not done a new risk assessment. And that's something that is also highlighted in the food safety management. We shall carry out a process hazard risk assessment, shall be identified which hazard do we deal with. We also shall evaluate the risk, and then we need to reduce the risk to whatever tolerable risk criteria maybe the corporate management or that end user have been determined what they try to achieve or to maintain. New by addition 2 is also, besides the hazards and the risk evaluation, we also have to do a security risk assessment shall be carried out. Again, we have another webinar where we are giving some highlights on some documents that may be very practical for those who still have to start with that. And back here in Europe, we have the NIS2. Although it's since 2019 a law in Europe, no country in Europe is actually already applying the law. And that is frightening. They are now saying that by 2024, that means beginning of next year, there will be in every country a certain, let's say, applicable practice to apply to the law, which is the NIS2 standard, which is actually security risk assessment on your industrial automation control system. Now, one of the standards which we will refer to in the standard will be called the IEC 62443. The third bullet is about planning. Like any project manager planning have done planning for all these years. Well, we have to do something the same for the life cycle. As an example, I cannot decide that I will do installation commissioning if we haven't installed the instrument yet. That means everything also makes sense in those activities that we have to plan, who will do what and who is accountable and responsible for what. And the fourth bullet is all about how do we measure that? You can say, oh, we have great procedures. People are also trained. They also have a know-how check. Now we let them loose in the field and they can start to do their work. The question is when they do their work and it becomes a routine job, how do we prove they have done their routine job correctly? I'll give you a classical example. An operator behind a panel that is working for 30 years on site, he knows maybe the plant inside out and he is doing daily activities which are somewhere written on a document. He doesn't need a document because every instruction is in here. And also, if he's doing it every day, the same item, he may not be, following the exact steps the way they were described. And also, he may not fill in some evidence documents that he actually have done the functionality correctly. So what I'm trying to say is, for an operation operator that is actually for more than years behind the panel, always doing the same thing, that is a big challenge. For maintenance engineers who have a very short, let's say, activity period, let's say you have to maybe go and replace a broken instrument, well, there you will have all your procedures, you will have your work permit. All of that is all a very short time. So there is more potential measurable for us to see how good they have carried out their activities. There will be procedures also to be implemented, how to follow the recommendation that is coming from previous assessments, etc. Assessments and audits are that tool or measurements that we need to carry out. So here the FSA stands for Functional Safety Assessment. Stage 1, 2, 3 needs to be carried out by a senior competent person, needs to be part of the team, a senior competent person independent from the design phases for stage 1, 2, 3. And for stage 4 and 5, that's for the end users, needs to be a senior competent person independent from the same operation and the same maintenance of the same system. So actually, we need to have a senior competent judgment, expert judgment, to check that verification report and based on the result of that report, make a judgment to find out have the engineers or operators or maintenance personnel really carry out the activities as they should. And the last one is all to do with the SIS configuration management. You need to have a procedure, of course, to track and trace all your different revisions. Revisions not only from hardware, also from firmware. I'm pretty sure that most of you who are an end user here listening into this webinar, you do have some field transmitters in the field and they all have included a certain firmware revision. The question is how many of those same hardware, let's say model numbers, have the same firmware revision today in your safety loops? That could be a classical question to start off to find out, to prepare yourself, to document all your assets and able to do your security risk assessments.
So we have another phone. So what is asset safety management according to IC 61511? Is less important for SIL 1 than SIL 3? It's not applicable for SIL 4? Or regardless of the C classes applicable for all IC 61511 applications or none of the above? This is the first time around this webinar with you. Keeping his mouth off and sitting in for him. So I haven't seen this board before, but I would guess B. Somehow it is important. However, we can speak as something. Well, I'll answer, guys. Take a few more moments. We will try to go pretty fast. So far, I see all the answers are full of one. And they seem that I would probably do the same to apply it,
It would be a unicum if we do have all the people, which are all, they're all based in different countries, different offices. They are not sitting next to each other. They would all select the same answer. That would be.
Oh, and they're all, because 100% of the answer and 100% is answer C. So let me see, was that correct?
Yeah, it's actually the correct one. So we do have We have an awesome answer because it is regardless of any SIL level. If it is now a SIL 1 or 2 or 3 loop, it is applicable for every. And sometimes in the earlier days of that poll question in previous webinars before, people would select either A because they would say, or B, would say not applicable for SIL 4, and SIL 4 is actually not allowed in the 615 or let's say not advised to use. So the reason why we have done this here is very simple. If you look into the manufacturers like GMI, there you have a different requirement for food safety management towards the SIL level. And the higher the SIL level, the stricter the requirement will become. As an example, as Paulo showed you earlier in the introduction of the company, the slide of all the certification, for any SIL 3 suitable or compliant device, GMI cannot make their own assessments. They need to do that by a independent organization of GMI, and that is why they go to all this TOVs, Exceeda, whatever. But if you look for the SIL 1 requirement in the 61508, there it has to be an independent person. For the SIL 2, an independent department. However, as you all know, we live in a competitive world. All the other kind of similar companies, competitors, they all go to independent companies to get this piece of paper called certificate. But the certificate is not a requirement from a standard. The requirement is to carry out an assessment. And assessment is also part of your functional safety management. Anyhow, let me move on. I will summarize this now with the common misconception, which is not my misconception summary. This is coming from the technical report. Reference is given here on the top. That's report number 4, which came out in February 2020, which was the famous Corona year. Well, in February 2020, they released report number 4. And in report number 4, what they have tried to achieve in that document, technical report, means it's not normative, it is informative. It was written on top of the normative section, part 1 of the 61511, and they compared edition 1 with the differences to edition 2. That's the first thing they have done. And what have they done also? They say, what is now the most common mistakes that or misconception that we have found in the industry over the last 3 or 4 years? And number 1 was the misbelief that FSM, or food safety management, is less important for a SIL 1 loop than it would be for a SIL 3 loop. And again, it is regardless what SIL integrity you try to achieve, food safety management needs to be proved that you maintain and you have carried out. Project teams desire for, let's say, a solution which is ready to use as more as a formality behavior. As I already was mentioning before, even today, this morning, I had the same topic again, that the end user was being given by a consultant a template, and they were following a template by ticking the box. But the question was, how effective do they actually fill in or actually carry out those activities which are maybe limited described in that tick box or checklist? So there is often the desire to defer consideration of performance monitoring and ongoing FSM to after the project startup and say, oh, you don't have to worry about it. We will actually start to do that once we have the project running. Well, no, this needs to be from day 1 of your project, even before you start to do something, even before you start to design something, even before you start to write some procedures. So functional safety management needs to be actually applicable or starting from the very first moment that you try to define some kind of an activity or some kind of a product. Example, if I go back to the GMI development, hardware and software engineers, it wouldn't make sense to first tell them, you go ahead and you define all the procedures to develop a new product, and then we will worry about later on how you can comply to the food safety management. It has to go hand in hand, because those activities which they have to carry out are also described in the functional safety life cycle of the 61508. For simple life cycle examples, depicted in the standard is not sufficiently detailed enough for sometimes implementing directly with the end user. In other words, if you go to the operator and maintenance phase, which is phase number 6 in the standard, if you go to phase number 6, you will see that the description for operator and maintenance is very, 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 very limited. That means the majority of all this text in the good engineering practice standard, which is 6.11, it's all about design and engineering. And it looks like they put all the effort on design and engineering it, according to standard. And once it's with the end user, it's almost like, well, you try to maintain your safety with it. that needs to be better described. So also part of the full safety management or manager on such type of project is to make sure that those specific procedures which are on the long run by different people carried out like operators and maintenance, that is where of course there's a lot of occasion happening in there that people can start to make some own interpretation or mistakes. And the SIS or the SIS safety management system tend to be changed and interacted less frequently than, as an example, the BPCS, which is still true. We do have some vendors which will combine and the control and the safety in one platform. It has often some disadvantages, also potentially some advantages. But one of the items that they start to say over here is if you look at a control engineer and he needs to work on a BPCS basic process control system that is more frequently, then he would, for instance, open an interlocking or safety PLC program. Maybe he opened it only once every 7 months or 8 months or whatever it's going to be. That means, he's not so familiar with that interaction. That also means, since he is not doing it so frequent, he has less experience with that, and potentially he starts to make some mistakes. Without a refresher training and the ongoing practical experience, initial competency is likely to degrade over time. And I keep on repeating that. It's not because you follow a training, you pass an exam, that this will be valid for life. We do have some competency schemes comparative of the one that we are doing. And they say, oh, if you come with us, you're valid for life. It's like, well, once you have been taught a standard, which was maybe out since 1997, edition 1 of the 61508, you are an expert for the rest of your life, or you are an engineer for the rest of your life. Well, it doesn't work this way because we know our instrumentation is evolving. That is one. Second, we also know that the standards are evolving. That means since we have instrumentation evolving, if I compare my instrumentation job in the 80s on the LNG plant, the gas plant in Belgium, well, at that time, our instrumentation, let's say today, was pretty simple. If I had to go calibrate one of those transmitters, I still remember we had two screws, was zero and span. That means we could screw up twice. We could make twice a mistake. Now, if you talk to a modern, let's say, control instrumentation engineer, and you look to their current installation with the current sensors, how many settings does a digital instrument like a smart or a hard transmitter have today? It means, of course, there's a lot more room for error today than it was in my older times. However, as I just get the question here, and I read also the questions with you, Paulo, how often the periodic review cycle of competencies? Well, that's a very good question. One is the 61511 is requiring a evidence of a periodic review. The periodic as a periodic itself has not been defined in once every year, once every 2 years or 3 years, whatever. I do know from practice, from experience with some clients, I know a client, they're doing it every single year. However, we also have to be careful and we have to admit what is a problem. As an example, in larger companies, like in Europe, we have a few. Well, there we have something called a union. If I go and challenge a senior person that is working for 30 years in this company, how competent he or she is to carry out that activity, they will be very, very, very sensitive on how the way you're going to find out or ask this. And if the union start to find out that you challenge some of the people who have been working there for years, the union may not be impressed with that inspection or periodic assessment. So somehow, the functional safety manager will need to find a way that they can make an assessment of the people which are responsible, accountable, without maybe upsetting them, which is of course a very sensitive business. And if you look into your own, let's say, experience, no one likes to be asked to prove yourself how good or bad you are. We all think of ourselves, we all do a good job. The question is, how can we prove that? And that is something here to come back on periodic review. The standard simply said we need to periodic prove the competency of people. Sometimes it goes together.
There's not an actual time frame. It doesn't say yes.
There's no answer in time, but sometimes, from a practical point of view, this goes together with the independent regulatory body assessments. And as an example, if you would be based in the United Kingdom, the Health and Safety Executive will actually make an assessment, which is state's number 4. They do this every 3 years. Back in Belgium, they have something called the PAM, which is a preventive active measurements. Well, they do it in batches every 6 months. So the question is, during those assessments, can they also assess the competency of people, or do they only assess the compliance of their operator and maintenance procedures according to whatever activity evidence they can find? So, as a summary, and this is a new slide, which is new in this webinar today, which was not in the previous FSM. There is no safety implemented function. There is no safety implemented system that can comply to the 6.15.11 edition 2 without having a effective functional safety management system in place. And once you have it in place, you need to prove how adequate you are using that. That is the first bullet. Number 2, I'm kind of getting tired after 30 years in this business of always have to prove my point again and again and again and again. People produce useless verification self-calculation reports. And why do I say useless? The tool that they use is maybe great and is very powerful, but the fair data is maybe not reflecting their reality. That is one. Second, most end users have no culture to say after so many hours, let's replace this final element and let's put in a revised element. They wait until the valve is dead and they still predict how safe they are. So this is all the nonsense, but still the paper looks very great. They have a SIL2 loop, and they say they're going to test every 1 year, another year, because every year means, well, maybe 1 year plus a few months. So no matter what is the excuse that you may have experienced or you have seen yourself, stop focusing only on a PFD and cell calculation using fair data, which is often not reflecting your real situation. And typically, to give you a question that you can start to think about, if you believe you are such an expert to define when your instruments will die, try to do it on your own body. Try to say, when will I die? And everyone will say, well, that's a stupid question. We cannot do that. Correct, you cannot do that. Why can you do it on your instrument then, you think? And that's something that people should start to realize. What is the essence of the functional safety standard? It's not to predict when the system will not be available. Yes, we shall document with a calculation, and we do an estimate, that's it. And the estimate can be accurate, can be totally wrong. There is no real good reference giving a standard on how to do it anyhow. And the last bullet, start by increasing the quality of the activities. Start today. Think about what are you actually responsible for? How do you prove how you have done this correctly or not? And that is the real essence of functional safety management, by implementing a good, solid, and for most a usable, practical functional safety management. Right, I'm coming to the end. We can support you also in GMI with the very famous book. It's very famous because there are more than 50 or 60,000 copies worldwide. That's the book called Safety Implemented System 4th edition. In that edition 4, and also I think already in edition 3, I have been the author only for 2 chapters. So I didn't write books as Paolo was mentioning. I've actually wrote a few chapters because it also takes a lot of time. But chapter 7 was the executive summary of the 6.15.11 edition 2. And the chapter was written in 2015 before the standard was out. So that was a bit of a challenge based on a draft. And the second chapter 8 is the safety instrumented function, or a safety loop. To comply to the safety requirement specification, 29 items you shall describe and you shall include. Well, the challenge, or the, let's say, the effort which I have done in there was to try to explain in words what actually could be a good description of a safety loop. That will be here the link that you can click to go onto the YouTube channel from GMI. And GMI have hundreds of videos. Well, I just look at the number. 112 videos so far are recorded. And again, that picture is a couple of weeks old, so there may be a few more in the meantime. But you will see that all those webinars are based either on the ATEX, or based either on the photo safety, or based either on a specific product from GMI. That is all free of charge to view again in the recorded session. We support you, of course, with training. As Paolo was saying, we still deliver through GMI the TUV Functional Safety Engineer for Safety Implemented System Competency Review Program. That is actually the one that I'm starting next week again. And last week I was in another country in Europe to deliver one. Fundamentals of Cybersecurity is a specific standard which is on, sorry, specific training, which is on the fundamentals, which is like the entry training that you will need to have to go to the second training, which is called the IACS Cybersecurity Risk Assessment course. We do have a special version now available that we combine those two trainings into 1 week. And of course, once you pass the exam, you will be granted on your personal name a certificate that you can use coming out from TOV Rhineland. We also have the in-house training and seminars, webinars, etc. Plus, we also can support you with some lifecycle support if it is now the 6511 or even the 62443 lifecycle support on security management. That is what we can support you. And last but not least, we also pre-recorded before the corona started. We had the GMI Academy, but I think now with the YouTube webinar, it's a bit of an overlap. And that's it, Paolo. I will stop this one sharing and I
Only
will
let me
share.
do the share, and when you do that, uh, when I do that,
Yeah,
here's a question. You mentioned
let me try to read it, Paolo, quickly. So,
you,
how do we find proper PFD reflecting our real situation compared to the one shown on relevant sales certificates? Well, a sales certificate, it depends on what is certificate based on, can be either based on Road 1H, that means a theory approach with an FMEA, etc. That's a theory approach. The Road 2H means practical experience. Practical experience is called proven in use for the manufacturers or prior use. What is since 2016, edition 2 of 61511, the main target that the end user operating companies start to collect their own validator and not the validator from someone else, not the validator from even another culture, another environment, another country. Your validator in your application with your experience, with your proof test interval, with your proof test coverage, etc., etc. That is the main topic. So PFDs, if you don't have that data, well, then there is no much choice left. Then you go to generic data. We have generic. In other words, for this type of instrument, that's a kind of a generic PFD. If not, you can ask the manufacturers, like GMI also have most of their equipment is all based on Road 1H, so they have all their prediction on failures already on their food safety manual, also potentially on some of their data sheets. Well, that is actually something that you can try to use if you don't have your own data. Book on FSM
so
edition.
we had some questions, and they were put through the registration process. This is we summarized them. You can go to the first question, and you can try to give us. Yeah, are you in control of the slide? Because I tried, but is
Correct.
FSA part of FSN? So first of all, what is FSA? Associate
Well,
assessment.
FSA looks at the assessment. I think that is what the person was questioning. Now, I have seen the question that actually, I mean, that was a question pre-registered when the people did the registration. So the webinar was not done. Now that the webinar is done, I mean, we answered that. But again, I summarize it. So function assessment needs to be done by a senior competent person, which is independent from stage 1, 2, 3, from a design team independent and independent from operation and maintenance for stage 4 and 5. And that's, of course, indispensable. So that means you cannot achieve a food safety management without having evidence that you have carried out that food safety assessment. So it's certainly a big part of evidence will come from the functional safety assessment. And then the FSA team shall review in detail the work carried out. That means that is why we need that verification report. They have to make an expert judgment. And basically, the backbone of the success of the lifecycle implementation on any project will be that you will make that assessment before you allow the engineers to actually continue to the next phase activity. That is also why now new by edition 2, which was this food safety assessment stage number 4, for an end user, they ask a periodic assessment. And again, the question, how periodic is periodic? Well, there is no definition in the standard. They just said to the food safety management requirement proves to us a periodic assessment. If you say we do it once every million years or once every 100 years, well, that's, I assume, still a periodic. Of course, you can already imagine that doesn't really make sense. Not when you have a factory running for 20, 30, 40, 50 years to say, oh, we do it once every 100 years. Well, that doesn't really make sense for us. So, periodic in this case for assessment is again average between 1 to 3 years is like a good average number that we see in the industry. Second question.
How to deal with several parties which have their own input, output, preferences, and priorities. Well, that's interesting one because you have different, you have the end user, you have the system test, you have the PC company, you have
Yeah.
us, suppliers.
Yeah.
How we put it
Now,
all together?
it's very difficult to answer this with a bit of a common sense, other than the functional safety management is coming from a functional safety standard, and the standard is not a directive, is not a law. That means there is no tool to say you shall follow the functional safety standard, unless, of course, you have an incident where the inspection investigators will say, why did you not use a standard which is held in 2004 or 2016? So coming back on the question, if you have different parties, you have a system integrator, and you have maybe your EPC contractor, and you have a system manufacturer, and you have a supplier as vendors, and you lump them all together. I mean, they all have their own reasons why they need to have their own full safety management. But when you combine this all together, what I would here propose myself, that's my personal proposal, I would appoint a functional safety manager from the end user operating company point of view, and they first have to define what are the deliverables, what are here our expectation that those different subcontractors or vendors or whatever needs to supply to that end user. But more to the point is also, what will the end user do with that? And I give another example. I had here an end user in Europe, and they were actually telling to all their frame agreement subcontractors, said, look, by the end of 2017, everyone shall have a functional safety management scheme in place. And everyone shall prove how you use it for our projects, which was a great question. So all the subcontractors, they all have to get their act together. They all were combining and they were trying to achieve a functional safety management, let's say, procedure. But then the question is, once it becomes to a real physical project or activity, what does the end user do with all this information? That means you need to take that information, filter this into your own functional safety management, and that is what I'm trying to say over here. So you need to appoint a functional safety manager that needs to appoint on personal department or organization level who is responsible or who is accountable to actually deliver that, let's say, evidence. Although often a challenge, that needs to be included in the overall functional safety management, since it will involve anyone supplying any service or any product in that life cycle. Right. That was
Yeah,
a specific
clear.
question.
In a further context, what could justify the introduction of functional safety management in existing process plan, starting with SLC phases 1 and 3 and following the supplier and integrator scope 4 and 5? Not sure I understand the
Well,
question. Would you do?
that's a very specific question towards the SLC stands for the safety lifecycle phases. So phase
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, so process hazard analysis, your LOPA and your SRS, and 4 and 5 as your design and engineering and programming potentially of your safety PLC, and 5 is your installation, commissioning, and validation. Those are the 5, main phases. While here, that specific engineer, which I also know by name, and I see that he is actually not online, so I regret he posed that question, which is a great question, but he's not online, so you will have to listen to the recorded version. So, what should be justified? Well, any operating company or end user needs to understand that you rather have competent engineers, personnel, helping you to achieving quality in their daily activities by following their own functional safety management, rather than simply using a SIL prediction evidence report to show how safe the plant is. And the justification answer is a question of what is more important for the operating company: to collect all the data, to predict on paper how safe they are, or to prove it with a quality scheme called functional safety management. So I'm firing the question back. I also know the person who asked the question to us, Paul. But here it is more the point is, what does their corporate image can afford to get away with? In other words, what is the end user at the end of the day will have a benefit from that functional safety management if there could be, for instance, an incident or an accident, and that corporate, let's say, company is maybe in a country that will not question how good they applied their quality management system enabled to achieve functional safety. Well, again, I cannot answer here. For all the end users maybe listening into this webinar, what is corporate, let's say, tolerable requirement or risk criteria what can they get away with before maybe they will be sued by whoever authority or, let's say, a regulatory body that may be applicable in that specific
We have
country. So,
some, real example, where a company accident costed about $6-7 billion, to hit the company. Uh, but I guess the question was, we have an existing plant that's been running for so long. Now we have to implement all of this. Does it make sense? I guess it does, even though you have had no accident, because that is just pure luck, in reality.
and it's not reverse engineering. It's not first, we do have plants existing built before even the first standard was out. So there we have to do a gap analysis. And with that gap analysis, that is what we typically will do in our assessment. We will define how far away are you from the gap criteria that we define in the standard. And based on the gap, then we leave them a certain period of time to try to close the gap, enable to improve their quality. That can mean that you need to train some people, write some new procedures, whatever could be the solution. But that is something on existing plans that needs to be considered. Right,
All
Paolo?
right, we are at the end of the webinar, just about an hour. So guys, you can, there we go. We can rate Tino and his effort is always very, making himself very available. Only I was trying to find a word for publication. I couldn't find the right word. Made a lot of publications. Uh, so, he has a lot of experience in the, also in, visiting plant reality. That's what I want to say, in real life application. Okay, great. Let me give 2 more moments, then Tino, you can go. Guys, I remind you that as Tino showed earlier, all these webinar recordings, you can review them later on in our YouTube channels, and also we will send you a copy of the slides to all of those who have registered or participated in the webinar. For those who have participated, then we will also send an attendance certificate, which, okay, you said, I was there. Were you listening? Who knows? Maybe we should put some tests at the end of this webinar. What do you think about that? To prove that the people out there learn something.
We already gave them a free test. We're giving them a poll question, but if you would do some extra tests, able to get a paper, I don't think
Yeah, we only have an hour, guys. It's not a long time to do this work. Take your time to learn about safety, because safety is, very important. Make yourself, your plant, the people that live safe. Here we go. Terminate, show you. Thank you. The 70% answer is for you, Tino, and the 30% answer good is for me. Thank you, Tino. See you next time.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao. Thank you. Bye bye.
Yeah,